During the pandemic, Florida was the promised land. No state income tax, endless sunshine, a house with a pool for half what it would cost in California or New York. In 2022 alone, more than 700,000 people packed up and moved there. But here's the number that doesn't get talked about enough. That same year, nearly 500,000 people packed up and left. That's the highest exodus Florida had seen since the Great Recession. And the trend hasn't reversed. Migration into Florida has fallen off a cliff, down roughly 93% from its 2022 peak. So what's going on? Why are so many people who chased the Florida dream turning around and driving right back out of the state, or staying, but wishing they hadn't? If you're thinking about making the move yourself, stick around, because the mistakes people are making are extremely avoidable if you know about them ahead of time. Let's look at the actual data first, because it tells a clear story. At the height of the pandemic migration boom, Florida gained around 311,000 net new residents in a single year. By 2023, that number had dropped to about 184,000. By 2024, it was down to roughly 58,000, and the most recent figure available is just over 22,500, a 93% collapse from the peak. Now, to be fair, that 2022 number was never normal to begin with. Before the pandemic, Florida typically gained somewhere between 60,000 and 82,000 people a year through domestic migration. So in some sense, the state isn't failing, it's returning to something closer to its historical baseline. Analysts have described much of that 2021 and 2022 surge as demand that got pulled forward, meaning people who eventually would have moved to Florida anyway just did it years earlier than planned. But here's the part that matters for you. Other states are now pulling ahead. South Carolina led the country in population growth rate last year. Idaho and North Carolina weren't far behind. North Carolina actually added more people in raw numbers than any other state. Florida isn't the automatic top choice it was a few years ago, and the reasons why are worth understanding before you sign a lease or a mortgage. If there's one theme running through almost every Florida regret story, it's this. People underestimated the true cost of living there. Home prices in Florida rose by roughly 60% between 2020 and the peak of the market. That alone priced a lot of people out of the affordable Florida fantasy they had in their heads. But the bigger shock for most new residents isn't the purchase price. It's what comes after you own the home. Homeowners insurance is the #1 budget killer. In one recent year alone, homeowners insurance premiums in Florida jumped by more than 40%. Today, the average Florida homeowner pays somewhere around $8,000 a year for insurance, several times the national average. That's not a one-time cost, that's every single year, and it tends to climb, not shrink. Car insurance has followed a similar pattern, with premiums climbing by double digits in recent years, driven partly by the same hurricane and litigation risk that's driving up home insurance. Then there are the costs that don't exist in most other states, or that people simply don't think to ask about until it's too late. Flood insurance, which is required in many areas and can add thousands more per year depending on your flood zone. HOA fees, which range from minimal to several $100s a month. CDD fees, community development district fees, which are common in newer master-planned communities and get added directly to your property tax bill, often surprising new homeowners who didn't realize they existed, and for condo owners specifically. Special assessments tied to new structural inspection requirements, which in some buildings have run into the tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars per unit. Put it all together, and a home that looked affordable on the listing price can end up costing far more per month than a comparable home somewhere else. Once insurance, HOA, CDD fees, and flood coverage are added in, money isn't the only thing people underestimate. There are lifestyle factors that catch new Florida residents off guard almost every single time. Distance from family and friends. This might be the single most common regret reported by people who move to Florida. There's usually a honeymoon phase in the first few months. New house, new weather, new adventures. But once the holidays roll around and birthdays and ordinary weekend visits start to feel like things you're missing out on, homesickness sets in hard. It doesn't necessarily mean the move was a mistake, but it's something people consistently say they didn't plan for emotionally. The intensity of Florida summers. Florida weather in a vacation brochure as palm trees and blue skies. Florida weather in July and August day after day is different. Extreme heat, extreme humidity, and daily storms that can disrupt plans for months at a time. Combine that with hurricane season, which runs from June through November, and you get a stretch of nearly half the year where outdoor life looks very different from the postcard version people imagined. Underestimating what near the beach actually costs and means. A lot of buyers move to Florida specifically for coastal living, but don't fully think through what that means in practice. Higher flood insurance, higher exposure to storm risk, evacuation logistics during hurricane season, and often a very different price tag than they expected for anything actually walkable to the water, chasing affordability that no longer exists. A big chunk of the regret stories come from people who moved to Florida specifically because they'd heard it was cheap and built their entire financial plan around that assumption without checking whether it was still true for the specific area and property type they wanted. In popular, desirable markets, that assumption stopped being reliable years ago. It's worth being fair here. Plenty of people move to Florida and love it. The pattern in who succeeds versus who regrets it is actually pretty consistent. People who move to Florida primarily for lifestyle reasons, the sunshine, the beaches, the golf, the boating, the year-round outdoor living, and who go in with realistic expectations tend to do well. So do people who come in with strong buying power, equity from a previous home sale, cash reserves, or an income that comfortably covers the full cost of ownership even if insurance keeps climbing. Retirees and pre-retirees making a deliberate lifestyle upgrade, rather than a budget-driven move, also tend to report high satisfaction, because they're not stretching financially and they're choosing Florida for the actual experience of living there, not just the sticker price. On the other hand, the regret stories cluster around a specific type of buyer, people stretching their budget just to get in the door, people whose entire financial plan depended on Florida being dramatically cheaper than wherever they came from, and people who prioritized square footage or a bigger house over location quality and long-term costs. If you're seriously considering a move to Florida, here's how to avoid becoming another regret statistic. Get an actual insurance quote before you fall in love with a house. Not an estimate, not a guess based on a friend's experience. A real quote for that specific property, in that specific flood zone, from an actual insurer. This single step prevents more Florida regret than almost anything else on this list. Calculate your full monthly cost of ownership, not just the mortgage payment. Add up the mortgage, property taxes, homeowners insurance, flood insurance if applicable, HOA fees, CDD fees if applicable, and a realistic utility estimate for Florida's climate. If the honest answer to "can I afford this comfortably even if insurance goes up again" is barely, that's your warning sign. For condos specifically, ask for the building's reserve study and any pending special assessments before you make an offer. This is not optional due diligence anymore. It can be the difference between a smart purchase and a six-figure surprise. Visit during the worst months, not just the best ones. If you're relocating from somewhere with mild summers, spend real time in Florida during July and August and pay attention to a real hurricane season before committing. The version of Florida you see in January is not the whole picture. Plan for the emotional cost of distance, not just the financial cost of the move. Budget for regular flights home. Build a local community early and intentionally rather than assuming it will happen on its own. This is the regret people report most often, and it's also one of the most preventable if you plan for it up front. Don't assume affordability that hasn't existed for years. Research the specific city, the specific zip code, and the specific property type you want, not the general reputation Florida had 5 years ago. What's true in one Florida county can be completely false 40 minutes away. Florida didn't suddenly become a bad place to live. The beaches are still there, the sunshine is still real. What changed is that the margin for error got a lot smaller. The people who move in with clear eyes about the true costs and the real lifestyle trade-offs tend to be genuinely happy they made the leap. The people who move in chasing a fantasy from a magazine cover or a TikTok video are the ones writing the regret posts a year later. If this helped you think through a potential move, subscribe for more honest breakdowns of what it's really like living in different parts of the country. And let me know in the comments if you've made the move to Florida and whether you'd do it again.